Eastern role-playing games, or JRPGs, have been around since the 1980s, and some of the best games that exist today are ERPGs. We can see through the years how they have changed, some for the better, some for the worse. Some of these games have the best stories ever in gaming, but I'm not here to talk about the story in these games. I'm here to talk about the visuals, style, the character designs, and the variation in looks. I have played some ERPGs in my younger days, but not as much as I do now. I'm currently on a journey, going through the older ERPGs that I missed playing as a kid, because of young age, lack of having these games, or I just didn't know about these games. But as I'm playing through these older games and playing some new ERPGs and looking at the ERPGs that will come out, I'm starting to get less interested in the newer ones, just because of the boring designs and cel-shaded duplicates that these companies are throwing out there. Don't get me wrong, I think there are good-looking cel-shaded games, for example Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and in my opinion that's just because of the variation in character design that stands out for themselves. So in this video I'm going to talk about character design and cel-shaded ERPGs, or in more clarity all of these RPGs that have the anime style of characters in them. Some may trade off with the typical anime style, some will be more realistic as well. Remember, this is my opinion, you may or may not agree with me. And to be very clear, I'm not talking down on the story or the personality of these characters, because some of these games I have yet to play. It's all about the visuals. Let's start with what a lot of people call the golden era of ERPGs, late 1980s till early 2000s. And it's mostly thanks to studios like Squaresoft, Konami, Capcom, Nintendo, Enix, etc. If we look at the golden era, we get games like Xenogears, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy series, Pokemon series, Mana series, Suikoden series, Alundra, Terranigma, Dragon Quest, Breath of Fire series, and so on and on. There are lots of them. So let's discuss character design from this era. First, let's look at the designs from 10 different protagonists in 10 different games. And when it comes to some of these protagonists, I will use some concept art or portraits, because that's what we were supposed to see them as when we were playing as these characters in 2D. We have Cloud Strife, Ryu, Fei Fong Long, Terra Branford, Ashley Riot, Chrono, Dartfeld, Hero, Rena Lanford, and last, Lynette Valkyrie. If we look at all these characters, at least from my perspective, we can see the difference in style when it comes to hair, face, body, jewelry and clothing. They all have their own cool design for themselves. We recognize them as that character just by seeing their character design. Even if Chrono and Hero have the same type of style by Akira Toriyama, which is fine. It's not like the Toriyama art style is in every ERPGs in the 90s and today. The characters still have their own uniqueness, where you can tell that these characters comes from their own game. And these characters are only the protagonists in these games, and the NPCs or the side characters also have cool and unique character designs. For example, if we take Suikoden 2, a game that has 108 characters. Let me say that again, 108. Some playable and some are not. But let me tell you, I was shocked when I saw the difference when it comes to the characters. You can pause the video and look around to see the difference in all of these characters. Even if some of these are animals, still unique. But it also made it way more fun when I played the game. Because every time you met someone new, they were different from the one you met before. Every time. Just to make another example, let's look at some characters from Xenogears. You could just stare at the characters and see that everyone's different from one another. In many different ways. Whether it's an animal, different face with different proportions, hair and so on. And a third example, if we move away from the classical ERPGs, let's look at the characters in a horror RPG, the classical game Parasite Eve. It's a game that got much less characters, But we still see a difference in the characters with different clothing, faces, hair. They're their own character. So I wanted to dig in more and decided to look up games between 1990 and 2008 to see the difference in characters. So I picked one female character from each game to see the difference in art style and design. From my perspective, I see a difference in clothing, body proportions, hair and face, and so on. But of course we can also see some similarities. We can't avoid some aspects like stances, weapons, stomach showing, clothing. We can see that it's the typical 90s anime and 2000s anime style from that era. But this is still better than the repetition we get today. I do think the character design and art style were so much better. And remember, this is coming from someone who played not so many ERPGs in my young age. So nostalgia is not that relevant here. Yes, I have played some, but not as much as I do now. But as I started to look up some more ERPGs between 2000 and 2009, we will see something that the game developers kept. A good example of a game that looks like the anime ERPGs today are Eternal Sonata, Fragile Dreams, Ruins of the Moon, Trinity Universe, and many other games between 2000 and 2009. Here is the thing. There are different types of art styles and character designs between 2010 and 2023, but I feel like every time I see a new Eastern RPG, there is always these types of character designs and art style. A more cel-shaded, repetition, copy-paste characters. Boring! It's almost like we're stuck in the 2000s. So what is a cel-shaded game? Well, it's all about the non-photorealistic rendering, used to make the computer graphics more flat, less shading instead of a shade gradient. It is mostly used to imitate the style of a cartoon or a comic book. So it's a style that avoids realism. Famous examples of cel-shaded games are Wind Waker, Okami, Persona, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Ni no Kuni, Fire Emblem, and so on and on. There are many of them. And of course there are good-looking cel-shaded games. But nowadays there are more replicas and uninteresting character designs with the same face, hair and clothing, which gives off less emotions from the characters and gives off a form of stiffiness that's extremely unsatisfying. It's almost like I said before, we're stuck between 2000 and 2009. And don't get me wrong, between these years this was something new and fun. But when the same thing is reoccurring over and over again, I don't know about you, but I get really bored.
Not interested.
Every time there's a new Game Awards or another type of conference for these gaming companies, every time I see a new or many new cel-shaded ERPGs that just look the same all the time, it just makes me want to turn off the TV. It's not interesting. It's boring. It's almost like you watch the same type of anime all the time. It gets boring until you see difference in the art style and see something refreshing. Let's look at some characters from 2010 to 2023. Many of these characters look the same, as it could be the same games a lot of times. It's boring, the facial expression look the same. But if you compare some games from the 2000s and the newer ones, it's like nothing have happened, look-wise. It just looks more polished. The cel-shaded blurriness in the face and the non-existent nose and mouth. I feel like they tried to make the clothes different by making them super quirky in a bad way. How many times have we seen that character design from these newer games? They all look the same. It's like buying new clothes. At first it's nice. Great, a new red dress. Then the next year, great, a new red dress, but let's make the strings blue. And this pattern goes over and over and over again. I think it's weird because the emotion in these newer Eastern RPGs are not there.
Lapidurist extraordinaire.
It's not over. The people of Bionis will never let you. We'll show you we have more than enough.
Stay here and fight, you coward!
Who are you? I need you to get out of my head!
But in the older ERPGs from the 90s are mainly clear portraits, but they still give off a different emotion. Even in the older gameplay, when it was in 2D, with less pixels, some games show off more emotion in gameplay. My number one dislikes are this type of style. These are characters that come from different games, but you would think that they're from the same game if you didn't know or if I didn't tell you. Then we have this type of style. Not as much light and airbrushed, but also different games. But they all look like, again, like they came from the same game. Some of you may say, why not show the concept art or portraits of the newer Eastern RPGs? The thing is, they look the same, even in their concept art or portraits. And also, I speak for myself. When I play the 2D Eastern RPG, I can imagine the character as non-cel-shaded style, which if there will ever be a remake of that game, it has potential to become a non-cel-shaded art style. For example, if they start to make remakes of some classicals, just turn something like this into this instead of this. The repetition is even in some RPGs that have the customization. I know the latest Pokemon game have made it a bit better when it comes to looks, but isn't it time for a new art style? I mean, for how long have they made the same style? Come on, Pokemon, time to move on. I was really looking forward to playing Harvestella, but it's so bland. I've seen this type of style 100 times. And that's why I like Stardew Valley's variation in character design or Elden Ring's customization. Some of you may say that the 2D pixel game have the same style as well as they did in the earlier days. But I have to say, yes and no. We can see an improvement when it comes to the style and graphics. For example, let's look at some new games like Octopath Traveler, Sea of Stars, Triangle Strategy, Chained Echoes, Rhapsody Marvel Kingdom Chronicles. They have improved graphic-wise compared to the older 2D ERPGs. It's fine if they keep making these cel-shaded games, but here's the thing. We know that there are other types of new styles out there or older styles that developers could use again, but also improve upon them. I counted how many anime cel-shaded Eastern RPGs that will come out this year. And there are 21 plus, probably more. And last year it was 28 plus games. Now I don't know if this shows that the cel-shaded anime RPGs are easier to make. It's just my assumption. You won't get as much Final Fantasy types of style or graphics in a year as you get the cel-shaded games. I want to see more variations, like the old school style like Octopath Traveler, Sea of Stars, Chained Echo and Moonlighter, Labyrinth Legend, or more like the style like Nier, Lost Odyssey, Dynasty Warriors, Wulong Dynasty, or for example a new ERPG where winds meet. A great looking game I look forward to. For example, if they had announced Where Winds Meet but with cel-shaded anime style like Immortal Life or Genshin Impact, my interest of playing that game would be zero. Here is also a thought or a want. My wish is to see all the old school ERPGs turn into the same style as Final Fantasy VII Remake. Not just Final Fantasy games should have the upper hand when it comes to these styles and graphics. There are plenty of other games from the 90s and 2000s that were popular with great stories. Because I'm also a bit afraid of bad remasters or remakes in the future, because I feel like after the Final Fantasy VII Remake is done, Square Enix are probably going to do more remakes, which I think is great, because there are so many good games that people should play from the older era. I also think that Dissidia is a great example of turning 2D characters into good art style, non-cel-shaded design. In the end, I think I want more realism meets anime, but that's just my opinion. Thank you so much for listening to my rant. I will go now, and please discuss in the comments down below what you think. Are you tired of the cel-shaded anime style or want more like Final Fantasy VII Remake or something else? Hejdå!